Okay, good afternoon and happy Sabbath. I'm happy to be back in the New Jerusalem Church. I just want to say that I was here a few months ago, and I saw some of the old members. I met some of the new members, and I see Lennox and Jackie in the back. Nice to see you again. Make sure we shake hands before we leave, okay? I should mention that my wife is not here today. She and I had been on the other side of the world for 2 weeks. We came home about 1:30 in the morning on Tuesday, and both of us around 3 or 4 p.m. are very sleepy. My schedule is more flexible than hers. She has to go to work, 9 to 5. So she decided today she would stay home and try to recover. But she gives her regards, and she's sorry she can't be with you. So there's this little personal note to start off with. You know that I've been here now as the interim pastor, as Elder Hector mentioned earlier. That is a function of my role as the multi-ethnic ministries coordinator for Greater New York. I don't know if all of you know, however, that in January of this year, I was also appointed to be the religious liberty director for the Greater New York Conference. So today I want to talk about that topic. I think it's an important one. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been involved in religious liberty from about the time we were organized as an institution in 1863. It's easy to think, therefore, that Seventh-day Adventists are involved in religious liberty because we're a minority group, we have some unusual practices and beliefs, and that it could be seen as something that we get involved in only to protect our own rights. But in fact, that's not the main reason. There is a practical element. I won't deny that. But it's not just to protect ourselves that we have been advocates of religious liberty. There are actually biblical and theological reasons for it. There are reasons having to do with who God is, who human beings are, and how that relationship should work. So today I would like to try to achieve 4 things. I would like to talk about the biblical and theological reasons, talk about how that matters to us, and I want to then relate it to the communion service because that's what we have at hand today. Fair enough? So I would like you to turn first of all to Genesis chapter 1. Now while you're turning there, I would like to make a general observation. Think about it. When you consider the overall biblical story, from creation through the fall, through the formation of Israel, the history of Israel, its ups and downs, the beginnings of the church, don't you see that there's a pattern that people have freedom of choice, right? Think about it. Why would God give so much instruction if we were programmed to do whatever He wants us to do in the first place? Am I right? When you think about the prophets, why would God send prophets after prophets after prophets with appeals, with promises, with warnings, and with threats if we were just programmed to do whatever He wanted us to do? Am I right? So when you consider the biblical story as a whole, it presupposes that human beings have a choice to either do A or to do B, as we talked about in Sabbath school. But I want to show you a few pivotal passages in the Old Testament and New Testament that affirm this observation. All right. I mentioned Genesis chapter 1. You know what Genesis chapter 1 is about, right? That's the creation story where God comes upon the unformed planet covered with water, and step by step He begins to organize it in such a way that it can produce life and sustain life. When everything is ready to go, the animals are already there, the fish, the birds are already in place, God appoints a human being. This is what it says. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. Now, you'll notice that this section that I just read doesn't talk about free choice per se, right? But it can be inferred, it can be implied that if human beings were given a role to manage God's creation in his place, right? And we were made to be somewhat like him, right? That it implies the fact that we can think, we can look ahead, we can sort of predict what might happen if we go this way or if we go that way. So, and we have a choice to act on it, right? This passage doesn't spell it out, but it's inferred. So this is the first pivotal passage. But if you go right to the next chapter, you'll see that there's a choice involved in the creation of human beings. Genesis chapter 2. This is what it says in verse 15. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. What is that if it's not choice, right? If human beings didn't have the option to go one way or another, what's the point of the whole passage, right? So these are two pivotal passages in the very beginning of the biblical story. Or maybe since you're facing that way, I should go here, right? Since we read from right to left in the Western culture. Two pivotal foundational passages. Let's look at another one. Take a look at Exodus chapter 19. Now, Exodus chapter 19 should ring a bell in your mind, because Exodus chapter 19 comes before what? Exodus chapter 20. And what happens in Exodus chapter 20? God gives the 10 Commandments, but it's not just a list of separate things, it's also his covenant with the people of Israel, right? This is a pivotal time in the formation of the people of Israel. You could say it's a critical time in God's very plan of salvation for the world, right? We know that the world went astray with Adam and Eve, but God wanted to put it back, so he chose a specific channel. He chose the people of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, including Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes, correct? So this is another time where God had just brought them out of Egypt. He wanted to plant them in the Holy Land, in Canaan, to be his exemplars and lead the world towards goodness and restoration. He could have just told them, hey, I just brought you out of Egypt. You're going to do what I say, and that's that. No, look what happens in chapter 19. God is speaking through Moses or to Moses. I'm not reading it in context. I always get confused whether it's Moses relaying what God is saying or God speaking at the same time. But you get the point. In chapter 19, verse 4, it says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you are to speak to the children of Israel. So it says, Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, what did they say? All that the Lord has spoken we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Now we know that Israel wasn't so good at keeping their promise, right? They made this commitment. But what I'm showing you about this particular passage is at this critical stage in history, when God was again reaffirming his choice of the descendants of Abraham to make them his special people, as it says here, among all the people of the earth. He didn't just impose it. He asked them. He told Moses, go and see what they're going to say. Now, they made the right choice. They said yes. And that's another illustration of what I'm talking about here, that God gave human beings the freedom to say yes or no, to align with him or to say, no, we don't want to have anything to do with you. All right, so keep that in mind. We're going to go back to this in a few minutes. But right now what I'm doing is I'm just surveying specific passages that show God gave freedom of choice. Let's jump to the New Testament. For those who are familiar with American culture, what's the best known verse in the whole Bible, even for people who are not Christians. John 3:16. You can recite it by heart. What does it say? For God, He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him may not perish but have everlasting life. As we were discussing in the Sabbath school class, God has always been the initiator of all good, the initiator of life, the initiator of instruction. When we see the history of Israel, even when they were going astray, He came after them. He gave them prophets. He gave them teaching. And then the climax of the whole, God's whole intention was sending His own Son in the person of Jesus, right? The second person of the Trinity coming in the flesh to live a faithful life, to die a faithful death, to resurrect. And now, even after everything God has done, He offers Himself to us, to the human race. He offers salvation. He offers inclusion. He offers new life. He offers the Spirit. But does He force it? What does it say here? Whoever believes, whomsoever will, or as we'll see in the next verse, whoever believes can have eternal life. You see, this is a critical thing I'm harping on here. As I said at the beginning, Seventh-day Adventists promote religious liberty. It's not just a pragmatic thing to protect our own skin. There's an essential biblical, theological reason for it. Let's go to the scripture reading, Revelation chapter 22 and verse, I think it's 16. Let me scroll there. It was the scripture reading today. For some reason, I can't see it in the notes. I'm going over quickly today because of we want to do the communion. Oh yeah, Revelation 22, verse 17. This is at the end of the book. The end of the book of books. The whole climax of everything. In the chapters 20 and 21, the new city has already come down, right? John has already shown us the end of the story, the reunion of heaven and earth, the restoration of all good things, the elimination of evil. Now, to end his writing, he's making his appeal, and he says, chapter 22, verse 17, the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let him who hears say, come. And let him who thirsts come. Whoever desires, let him take the water of life freely. What is this if not an invitation? What does an invitation imply except the freedom to either accept it or reject it? So far so good? Am I making myself clear? That the biblical story as a whole shows that God created human beings with the freedom to make choices, not just general everyday choices, but choices in relationship to himself, to either join with his program or to say, no, I'm not interested. All right, so this is the first step of what I wanted to accomplish today, to just show and affirm that God has built into human nature, as revealed, as documented in the scriptures, the freedom of choice. But now we have to ask the theological question, part 2. Why would God do this? You know, I was talking to Hector during the break, and we were talking about my trip overseas to Thailand, and he asked me, so you still keep in touch with your students? I was a teacher in Thailand more than 20 years ago, before I ever came back to be a pastor in New York, actually, before you all knew me. And he asked me, you still keep in touch with them? I said, well, Facebook is the venue that helped us to keep in touch with those people from so long ago. So I use Facebook for that reason. I read things too. But some time ago, I don't know, last year sometime, I started to see reels, right? Reels about things that people do. And sometimes they show you very interesting things that people do in their field on how to do things well. But I started watching these reels of people making dumb mistakes, right? And you know how it is. In Facebook, once you start watching, you get more of those, right? So every day I get in my Facebook page people doing dumb things. This is what I'm trying to say. People make choices that are not so good. I saw one the other day. I don't know what it was about. A person was on the roof of a low one-story house, and they had like one of those plastic picnic tables underneath, and he jumped off the roof to land on the table, right? Have you guys seen this? Apparently it's a thing, because I've seen more than one. But the one I saw the other day, he jumped off the roof, he missed the table, and so he came down with his full weight on the ground. Now, you could break your back that way, am I right? And there's like multiple things I see of people doing things that are completely ridiculous. And I'm sure some of them do end up injuring themselves very badly. So I'm asking the question, in light of the fact that people have made, are making, and will make stupid decisions, wrong decisions, harmful decisions, decisions that hurt themselves and other people, why would God do that? Why would God give us freedom of choice in the first place when he knew that we were not just liable to use our freedom of choice badly, but that he foresaw that we would? Now, you'll notice something here. I'm talking about religious liberty, and I'm talking about freedom of choice in the context of religious liberty. But some of you may recognize that this dovetails with another big discussion in theology. I'll wait for him to quiet down a little bit, because I know it's a little bit distracting. I don't know what happened, but he's being taken care of. Anyway, there's a big issue that comes up all the time in people that want to talk about God, especially people that question God. It's called the problem of evil. Have you heard that expression? The problem of evil is the issue in which people say, if God was such a good God, why is there so much suffering? You've heard that before, right? And the reason is what we're talking about, is that human beings themselves have been granted free will. So the question is, why would God do that? That's the theological issue now. I would like to suggest 3 reasons, and I'm going quickly today. I'm not going to develop them in detail, but you're familiar with a lot of this. Anyway, the first reason is because without freedom of will, without free choice, there's no such thing as genuine love. And let me explain what I mean. When I was, many of us studied to be pastors at Andrews University, right? We get our Master of Divinity degree there. That's like the flagship school in the world, although there are a lot of now other theological seminaries around the world. During my time at Andrews, I had a student job. I worked in the public relations office, and I had 3 main things that I would do. I would write press releases. Press releases were like little 1-paragraph things. Andrews University received a $50,000 grant from the Johnson & Johnson Foundation to improve its physical education facility, something like that. Very small. Then I would write feature stories about people on campus, either professors or staff people who were doing something significant, right? Those were full length. They would be in like what we call the Gleaner, so they would be in the local Lake Union Herald, I think it was called. The third thing that was my standard operating system, this is the day before we had cell phones and computers. I would go in, and the office, on my desk in the office would be a stack of newspapers. The local Berrien Springs newspaper, the Southwest Michigan newspaper, even the Chicago newspaper, Chicago Tribune. The hardest part of my job was I was supposed to leaf through all of these newspapers to see if there was any mention of Andrews University. You know how difficult that is? You have to pay attention to every line, every column, right? That's one thing. But the other part of it is when you're looking at the newspaper, I'd get distracted by reading the articles in the newspaper, right? So like part of me knew, hey, I'm supposed to be at work, I'm supposed to be doing this thing, but I'd be reading these articles. At that time, there was a weekly column called The News of the Weird. Have you ever heard of it? It's a compilation of all the dumb things that people do. For example, one guy robbed a bank. He planned it out meticulously. He was able to succeed going in and run out with the loot. He gets in his car, and he had no gas in the car. You know what I mean? So this is the kind of stories. It was like one thing after another of the things that people do that are weird. Well, one story, I never forget. It was of a young man who was in love with the young lady. She didn't love him back. So he was talking to her in her apartment, and it says he hog-tied her. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I think it's when you tie somebody's wrists and ankles together. I'm not even sure how you could do that. You couldn't do it with me. I'm not flexible enough for that. But anyway, he hog-tied her and left her on the living room floor, and he said, I'm not going to let you out until you tell me you love me. Now, what's going to happen? Maybe 5 minutes goes by, 15 minutes goes by, a half an hour goes by. What do you think's going to happen eventually? She's going to say, all right, I love you. Is that real love? Because she's under coercion, right? She's under pressure. She's under threat. So I'm using that as an illustration of the first reason I'm giving you today of why God has actually built into human beings freedom of choice. Because without the ability to respond freely to another person, there's no such thing as genuine love. It might be an act. It might be something people do because of their own self-interest, like you marry a rich guy, you may not really like him at all, but you want the money. You know what I'm saying? There's all different reasons why people can do things. But to have genuine love, where a person sees God and says, wow, I'm attracted, or sees another individual and says, I'm attracted, I want to be with this person, it has to be in an atmosphere of freedom. Clear enough? Second reason, it's related, it's similar. There's no such thing as genuine worship if it's done out of fear and coercion. For the same reasons, we want to worship God because we see something worthy in God that we acknowledge in God that's worth responding to. But then another reason that's a little bit different is if people do not have the freedom of choice to make their own decisions, whether right or wrong, to evaluate things, decide what, and determine what they would like to do, how would we ever grow up and become mature? Now, I have not had the chance to have children, but I do know that there's a principle. When children are small, you don't give them free reign and free choice about everything, right? You tell them what to do. No, you can't do that, you can't do that. But as they get older, they get a little bit more and more, right? Freedom to make their own choices. Okay, you can now pick out your own clothes. And then maybe, you can pick out your own college. And after a while, they go out on their own, right? Imagine if a child grows from age 1 to age 45 and they're never allowed to make their own choices. How can it be said that that individual ever matured and ever developed a reasoning capacity to make rational decisions or moral decisions, right? So the third reason I'm giving today is this. Without freedom of choice, human beings might be something. We might be a happy creature even. You never know. Happy to eat and play if we were programmed always to do the right thing. There might be some pleasure in that. But we would never be real human beings that God wanted us to be, that can actually make adult choices to do the right thing. So these are the three theological reasons. And when Seventh-day Adventists defend religious liberty, it's not just to protect ourselves. It's because we believe that God built it into the human being for a purpose. Because without freedom, there's no true worship. Without freedom, there's no true love. And without freedom, we never grow up to make our own mature decisions. Is that clear? All right. Now, I'm going to try to pull it a little bit together quickly today. I'm going to go to my third point. If it is true, what I'm saying, that God gave us real choice, real options, and we see it anyway. Like I said, we see it every day all around us. People out there are making good choices and bad choices right now as we speak. Am I right? All right, so it's not like so unusual what I'm saying. If God actually did allow us this freedom, how does he go about attracting us to himself? I already eliminated force, right? Force, he could use force. As a matter of fact, there's a passage that I mentioned. If you take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, I want to go over that story again. Deuteronomy chapter 5. You know what Deuteronomy means, by the way? It's a Greek word. It means the second law. It's the second giving of the law, in a sense. It's when Moses, near his time of death, is retelling the story of what had happened 40 years ago, right? And he's giving them the law again. He tells the story of the Mount Sinai, and this is what he says. The people are speaking. This is Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 26 and 27. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire, as we have and live? This is the people talking to Moses. Then they say, you go near and hear all that the Lord our God may say, and tell us all that the Lord our God says to you, and we will hear it and do it. That's the quote I said before. It's paraphrased here. They said, we're going to do it. But watch how God responds. The next verse, verse 28. Then the Lord heard the voice of your words. This is Moses telling them the story again. The Lord heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. Then God says, oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and always keep all my commandments, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. The reason I bring this passage up, even though it's parallel to Exodus 19, is it uses the word heart here. Now, I was instructed that the biblical word heart means the will, and I believe that's probably the principal thing, but I don't think it's limited to that. The same way we use the word heart, it means the affections, the attractions, the inclinations. What I'm asking here is, how does God go about taking free people like we are? How does he go about attracting our whole commitment? Not just a mental assent, but the whole affection, so that we're actually on his side. How does God go about doing that? I would suggest to you that he goes about doing that by revealing himself, revealing who he is. Now, I don't have this in my notes, but almost 50 years ago, I had an encounter with God on the mountain. I didn't have a lot of information at that time, but I had a sense of God's presence, and it was beautiful. And I responded, and it changed my life. There's a way that God presents himself to us that is attractive if we allow it. Then there's this whole history of the book. We learn about how God was faithful, how God was patient, how God was just, how God was fair. And then, like as I said earlier, the pinnacle, how God was so loving that he came down in the person of Jesus Christ and lived the life of service and died in our place. And there's something about all of that information, all of that input in a free environment, not coerced, that wins people's hearts. The way I sum this up is, when it comes to freedom of religion, how does God win us over? Does he use manipulation? Does he use threats? Does he use conspiracy, lies and exploitation? I would like to suggest to you that the reason God could leave human beings free to either respond to him or not is because God himself is enough. The revelation of God himself, when he comes to us, whether it's in that initial thing where we don't have a lot of information, just the experience, like I mentioned, or he comes to us, we're explaining, hey, this is what God is really like. God is really like the one who walked with Israel for decades and centuries and stayed with them, even though they were unfaithful. God is like the one who came down from heaven, as Paul says, and didn't think equality with God was a thing to be grasped, but made himself a servant and washed people's feet. If we can get that picture, we don't need to add coercion. We don't need to add force. We don't need to add governmental legislation. God himself is enough. And this is why Seventh-day Adventists promote religious liberty. It's not just for practical reasons. It's for theological reasons. Because we believe God made human beings in such a way to respond or not. And in his appeal to us, the ultimate and best way to do that is to show himself to us for what he's really like. Now, we're going to go practice the very thing that Jesus himself did, the foot washing. Then we're going to come back and take the wafer. What I want you to keep in mind to pull all of this together, I covered 3 things. The idea that the biblical story reveals a God who gave choice. Theologically, I gave the reasons why. And I summed it up by saying, God doesn't need all of those other apparatuses, or apparati. I'm not sure what's the correct plural of that. God doesn't need that, because he himself is enough to attract us. When we go down and wash each other's feet, let's keep this picture of God in mind. When we come back and share in the bread and the wine, let's remember that we are called to represent that God. We are called to be like him. You know, the world is crazy now. The political situation and the Christian nationalism on one hand and then other extremes on the other. It's easy for us to want to use those other methods. Force, fear, threats, lies, maybe. That's not what we are called to as Christians. We are called to remember who God is and to replicate his way of being in the world. Let's keep that in mind as we celebrate the 2 services.